All right, friends, welcome back. I am Jason, and this is my buddy Joe. And important topic for discussion today, at least I feel like it's an important topic for discussion, is spiritual strength. So we often think about physical and mental strength as being a priority in our lives, and that's what I'm always talking about, and that's what I'm always preaching, is being physically, spiritually, and mentally stronger. My weakness, by far, the one that I am the weakest at, is the spiritual strength. At least that's how I view myself. That's how I see myself. That's my biggest struggle, because I know how to get physically strong. Like, it's pretty simple. I mean, I'm pretty good at that. Like, I can do more push-ups. I can run more miles. I can do the things that get physically strong. Mentally strong, I can read books. I can watch videos. I can educate myself. I can become more intellectual, perhaps. Spiritually strong, however, that one is more difficult for me. And I want to know what your thoughts are. I want to know what your thoughts are on why it's so important to be spiritually strong. I want to know why do you think it's so difficult? Why is that the most difficult one?
For the population at large, I think it's the most difficult one because you're taught universally it's just not something you have to develop.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost exclusively kind of portrayed as going to church, and while that's part of it, but it's kind of pushed into to a religious context, and as folks, I think, mistakenly become more and more secular, I think they see less and less need for spiritual development. Now, I think there's two ways to look at the idea of spiritual strength. One, kind of from a theological standpoint, know what you know, why you know it. You got to understand it. We teach this to the boys in Green Troop all the time. It's not good enough to throw slogans and memes out. You actually have to put some time and energy into understanding in a greater, more thorough context the ideas that you claim to espouse. It's not good enough to be on the winning team.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it right? What makes it moral? Because, if you're in a pinch, that's going to be your default, your morals and your values. And these are things you kind of have to have well thought out before you get into morally ambiguous areas.
Right. Why do you believe what you believe, and why are you standing behind these values and beliefs?
Listen, if you're going to tell me you're a Christian, it's like, don't just throw scripture at me. You
Why?
better be able to you better be able to discuss like meaningful subtext and context.
Well, I think, like, one of the things that I've struggled with recently is it's a choice, right? I think it's a choice. Correct me if I'm wrong, or you if you disagree. Like, I think love is a choice. I think loving somebody is a choice. I don't think it's just something like, I couldn't help it. I love this person so much, but I couldn't control it. I don't think that's necessarily a thing. And I don't think faith is something that just happens. I think it's a choice. Like, I choose to believe what I believe, but I have doubts. You know what I mean? And,
yeah, sure.
And I am, I guess, feel guilty for my doubts.
Well, I think that's, if you put your Christian hat on, that's kind of the whole struggles with God. That's an understood phenomenon within the Christian faith. You're going to have doubts along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I think most folks just walk away.
Yeah, it's too hard.
They don't investigate.
It's too hard to walk away from it.
They don't try to learn it more. They don't try to...
It's so easy to turn it off. Like, it's just say, nope, I'm not religious. Like,
yeah, but
I move on.
There's this sweet space between, what you're able to articulate as a human and what we're able to experience and understand as people. And that space is usually the realm of poets and artists. That's where they thrive.
Mm-hmm.
The poet's able to say the words that I can't. And when I read it, I'm like, man, that's it. They got
good.
it.
Yeah, that guy.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's that intangible part of being a person that most of us, common folk, are familiar with. And it gets difficult to kind of study these spiritual and matters of faith in an academic world that's trying to, reduce that down to
explain away
it all. And in doing so, they leave life a bit sterile and dry.
Yeah, the denial that the spiritual realm exists and just explaining away everything. It doesn't.
Yeah, it's like, hey, magic, it's okay. Magic is real.
Magic is a thing.
It's a thing.
Yeah. Well, why do you think becoming spiritually stronger is important? Why should we put emphasis on that?
Well, I think it comes back to the second aspect of spiritual strength. There's that removed from theology. It's used, like the spirit of the warrior, the can-do spirit, that drive to win, that drive to endure. And I think when you've kind of preloaded your gun with a thorough spiritual understanding of who you are, what you are, and why you believe, it becomes a bit easier to
run
endure,
into the fire.
to run into the fire, to walk that extra mile, to carry that extra weight. Because I can't speak for everybody, but in my experiences, when I'm feeling, as a person complete and whole, I understand the value behind why I'm sacrificing and suffering a bit more than just, I'm gonna make some money off this.
Right.
But there's a bit more to the world. I'm a little more interwoven into what's going on with the people around me, when we're all kind of sharing the same worldview.
Yeah.
And for us, we live in a Christian society.
Mm-hmm. Or used to be.
We do. Right? It's been gutted and hollowed out.
Yeah.
It's like a locust shell. I get it.
Yeah.
And that's why I appreciate the service that academics can bring to the discussion, but they have a habit of attempting to place themselves as in positions of spiritual authority. And they try to explain away the magic. They try to explain away that intangible human existence. This is Age of Enlightenment stuff. They don't like religion. They want rationale and so on. So
2 + 2.
So naturally in society, the arbiters of truth have transitioned from the priesthood to the academics, and they don't exactly live the best lives.
Right.
But that idea that I'm going to go the extra mile, carry the extra weight, I'm going to bleed the extra ounce,
Yeah.
I think that comes with mentally and spiritually having your ducks in a row and knowing what you're about.
Yeah. So we talked about this earlier, and that's that, courage is running into the fire even though like that you're terrified and you're going to get hurt. That's courage. But if you have faith that so if I die, I'm going to go to heaven, right? I believe in Jesus. He's my Lord and Savior. I believe that when I finally kick the bucket and I breathe my last, there's paradise awaiting me, awaiting for me. So, am I courageous? Because I have the parachute, I think is what you said. That was a good analogy.
I say so. I mean, courage fundamentally is acting in spite of the fear.
Mm-hmm.
Like the first time I went skydiving took a lot of courage.
Yeah.
The last time I went skydiving,
I've seen this guy on a roof. He does not like heights.
I do not like heights. But the first time I went skydiving, I took a lot of courage.
Yeah.
But the last time I went skydiving didn't take much. I was good, right? So that's courage is acting in spite of fear.
Right.
So yes, I still think in that context it takes a lot of courage. It's just you probably have a bit more armor going into the situation and confidence in the outcome, good or bad, because you've taken the time to build up not just who you are, but what you are.
Why you do what you do.
Because I've said this before. It's like, I don't want to die.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to die.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the stuff that I've been put on this world to do. I've had kids. I've loved my family. I've done the best I can by the people around me. I'm not perfect. I've had many great adventures. I've lived a good life. So if I die tonight, I won't die with regrets.
Mm-hmm.
That's
got to feel good, right?
Well, I think that's what people are shooting for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to be close enough to death. I've said this plenty of times where for sure had moments where I knew I was going to die. Like that's happened. You know, it didn't, but for sure I was going to die.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to wait until my 70s. I see people on their deathbed all the time in their 70s and 80s, and they all say the same thing. I wish I had more time with my family.
Wish I'd have done this.
They never say, I wish I worked overtime.
Yeah. Wish I'd have made more dollars. No.
Well, I had the benefit of learning that earlier on in my life, and I feel, in my own way, having the courage to live by that newfound understanding. Because I got to tell you, this world wants you to throw away your life energy earning a paycheck and a salary. And I hate to use the term wage slave, but
yeah,
it fits.
Yeah.
So I've managed to I think live a life worth living, understanding those underlying, I don't know, concepts. So I'm not afraid to die. I don't want it to hurt. I'm just being honest. And I don't want to die. There's plenty of stuff I want to do.
Right.
There's a lot of life left in me.
Yeah. We're not done yet. Yeah.
Right. But if it were to happen, I've invested enough time into figuring out who I am, what I believe, why I believe it, and though not flawless, doing my best to live by that. And the net result is, I feel like, in my own humble opinion, I've done all right. So I'm not afraid of what happens next.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like I'm very, I don't want to say content. I don't think that's a good word, but
no, it's the right word.
Yeah.
We're taught in this world to chase happiness. Happiness is fleeting.
Yeah.
What you seek is satisfaction and contentment. And if you achieve satisfaction and contentment, there will be plenty of happy moments.
Yeah.
We have this habit of, kind of our values are turned on their head, where we seek happiness when we should be seeking contentment. And the moment happiness leaves our lives, what do? We quit. Right?
Yeah.
So,
well,
that's part of spiritual. What
I mean by content is, like, I've got a wife and kids that love me. I've been on a lot of adventures and had some successes professionally, and I've got a lot of friends, and
you've done some good stuff.
I feel good about my life, and what I've done and where I've been, and the people that are in my life, and I'm content. It's not that I'm done and I'm not striving for more things.
Yeah. But that's the thing.
Yeah.
I think if you left a man alone in like isolation, because we're all islands among ourselves now, however the saying goes. They have a habit of achieving that first goal, feeling that initial satisfaction and contentment, and then coasting. Whereas if you're in a good, healthy men's network, they don't let you do that.
Yeah.
Like, congratulations on your success.
Now what?
What's next?
Yeah, that was great.
Right, because we don't want you to fall into that trap.
Right.
We want you to constantly be growing.
Lethargic.
Not in a way where you feel inadequate, but where you've come to accept, look, I'll spend the rest of my life learning new stuff and figure out more things about me and the people around me. That's the point, is to learn those things to the day I die.
Yeah.
And being okay with, I'm not perfect. There's only one perfect human, and it's not me.
Right.
Right? So I'm not perfect, and I'll just keep growing and learning, and I think all that concept of becoming, that's part of spiritual strength. I think it's all part of
a lifelong process.
Like I mentioned to you before, when I was in the cool guy unit, the overwhelming majority of them were very spiritual folks. They were various denominations of Christianity, and we all like to poke fun at each other.
Sure.
Right? But yeah.
But why do you think that is?
Yeah.
Because that's really interesting. I think that's really interesting.
From a theological position, I think it shores you up spiritually. It gives you that spiritual strength. The unit, I don't think we'll ever know. They're constantly keeping tabs of data and trying to figure out what makes the guys tick. But that just happens to be one of the features.
Is that one of the unspoken things that...
Yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff about that group of dudes. They're all highly successful, high achievers, highly intelligent. Yeah. And weird stuff like and I may be misquoting this, but there's like more Boy Scouts per capita in that organization.
Yeah. Eagle Scouts.
Yeah, more Eagle Scouts. They're trying to crack the code on what makes it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I don't think they're ever going to crack it is it goes back to that intangible part of being a human.
Right.
That space between the poet and the person, right? That is culture. That's what culture is. That organization has a culture that, try as you might, it's the human element that makes that culture successful.
Right.
And then all those ingredients go into that. You're not going to be able to itemize it and commodify it.
Right.
Let's face it, that's what they're really wanting to do.
Yeah.
How do we make everybody this awesome?
Can't do it.
Can't do it. Right. So
and you think a big portion of what makes that group successful is the spiritual strength?
I do. I'm not going to say it's a Christian organization. Certainly not. But man, there's a lot in there.
But it's composed.
I'm telling you, there's a lot in there. I've been around a lot of units, and I've been around a lot of organizations, and I got to tell you, almost to the man, I was the outlier because at the time, I was living La Vida Loca.
Yeah, I was going to.
I went alone in that.
No, I was going to ask you that.
Coming from group, most of us were just bikers, you know. But in that particular organization, everybody's very family oriented, very church oriented,
squared away guys.
Very, very like on paper squares.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Squares.
They cut their lawn. They pay their bills.
Yeah.
Yes sir, no sir.
Not bikers.
No. These guys are professional in their personal life and in their professional life. And while I can't speak to the specific function, it's certainly there and it's certainly present. It has to have something to do with it.
Right.
So
it can't be coincidence.
It can't be coincidence. But, that spiritual strength, I think if we live in the West and you live under the umbrella of Christianity, whether you feel like you practice or not, your worldview is shaped through that lens. The moral code is, you can get away with doing what you want, but that part in you that knows you're wrong, that comes from that Christian, Western Christian moral view. Doesn't mean you can't get away with it.
Sure.
Like,
do you think, how much of that do you think is internal versus society?
I think it was always internal and to the person. And when we were all doing it, society as a whole, prospered.
Yeah. And as we deviate away from that?
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's this old, it's for a littering commercial, but they're right. I'm just going to throw away this one wrapper. What's the big deal? It's just me. But if we all do that, there's candy wrappers everywhere.
Right.
Well, to use that example in reverse, if everybody chipped in and focused on their own spiritual health,
society as a whole would benefit.
Prospers.
Yeah.
I think the easy answer, and I say easy, it's not that there's not a lot of work, is if you live in the Christian West, the easy answer is to explore that. Not just regurgitate scripture. There's nothing more frustrating than scripture battles, because then you're just piecemealing stuff. But Christians used to be very, very good at discussing the philosophy and the theology and the Christology and all these other concepts that make up Christianity and Christian thought. And we've kind of relegated ourselves to scripture battles. Okay, you posted 5, I posted 7. Aha, I won.
You win.
And man, buddy, that is what. And those folks who were looking for direction and looking for belonging and spiritual strength, they don't respond to that. Right. Why, like you talked about, why is it still courage if I have the golden umbrella on the other side? That's kind of what they want to know. Why is it that a man of faith doesn't fear the afterlife in the same way the atheist perhaps does?
Yeah.
Listen, it's just not exclusive to Christianity. We know there are other religions, right?
Right.
But the one you were born into and the one that fits most with your current worldview is Christianity. And if, your whole life, I guarantee you, most of these folks have been talked out of exploring it. I'm not a pastor. I ain't telling you what you need to believe or whatever. It's worth looking into. It's who you are. It's where you're from. It's how you got here. So Were Europeans with a different belief system prior to Christianity? Yes.
Sure.
Christianity inherited a lot of those values. It's not the source. It inherited these values. So though it may not have created some of these values, at the moment at least, it's the steward of those values. So it's very Greek.
Yeah.
A lot of Greek philosophy in Christianity. There's no getting around that.
Mm.
And sometimes it helps. We have found, at least within Green Troop, when we're talking to the young men, to talk about philosophy separate from theology, get those concepts down in a way where most of these young men are pre-programmed to just reject religion.
Yep.
So, okay, that doesn't mean we can't talk about the subject.
Mm-hmm.
So once we get everybody to start agreeing and starting seeing things and open things up, we don't push these kids. They go church on their own. Just to start looking more. They
just inquisitive.
Just inquisitive,
minds, yeah.
you know. But we're actually making them discuss it and think about it and get out there, and that's actually how you get to know folks too.
Yeah.
Like you think you share conservative values.
Mm-hmm.
You think you do,
mm-hmm.
until you really start talking about, you know, what's good, what's just, what's moral.
Mm-hmm.
Then the truth comes out.
So I guess one of my early questions that we talked about in the beginning of this video was, you know, what does it mean to be spiritually strong? And then, so I want to know what your kind of thoughts are on that, if you can kind of define that to some degree. And then follow-up question is how do we become more spiritually strong?
Yeah, I think I would define it loosely as knowing who you are and what you are, how you got here, and why the people that got you here thought the way that they did. Because that all comes together into shaping, you know, your strength, you know, how you see the world, how you interact. It frames your values. It's that, again, that space between the poet and the everyday man where I know life exists. I'm going to carry on just a little bit further. I'm not going to give up.
Yeah.
It feeds into that.
Yeah. But it's more than just like a lineage, right? It's more than just who came before me and who I am, who's following behind me, you know? Like
it
it's
is,
more than
but
that.
Listen, if you don't care about what your parents built, then don't expect your kids to care about what you built.
That's true. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I get. No,
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I think that's super important.
But what that tradition is passing along is, you know, again, putting our Christian hats on, you know, like it or not, the book was written almost 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be some context missing because we live in 2025.
Right.
That tradition that's been carried along is what helps map you here so that you are being theologically and sincere and authentic in your adherence to your belief system.
Right.
But yeah, they didn't know what the internet was when they wrote the New Testament.
Yeah.
Right. So now you got to deal with the internet. Right. That's where that tradition and that fellowship goes a long way towards bridging those gaps. Because there might not be a specific answer for a specific modern technological dilemma, but that doesn't mean the wisdom isn't there, and that doesn't mean the shared communal experience isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense.
It gives you confidence. It gives you confidence.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have definitely experienced that, and I've definitely felt that in difficult times in my life, whether it be just something, you know, within the family, or if I'm like, you know, about to jump off this tall thing, like, you know, like whether it depends on what the situation is, I guess, but I've definitely felt my spiritual strength come into play in those types of situations, and it's been really, really helpful.
There's that form of courage. There's another form that we don't experience often. It's when you're in that morally ambiguous gray area. Sometimes it's represent
what's right, what's wrong.
What's right, what's wrong. And having that spiritual strength, knowing who you are, what you are, why you believe what you believe, really helps guide you in those times. There's this meme of the one guy, you know, and then the crowd spaces around him, but he's standing against the whole crowd. Like, we all like to think that if we know what's true and right, we'll be that one guy standing against the world. But that guy put the work in and put the time in. He knows what he's about. He knows what he believes, and he knows why he believes it. So he has the strength and the confidence and the stamina to stand against the world who's full of it.
Right.
Right? Modernity is full of it. We see it all around us. In the last few years, when they were running around, and not political, but a lot of this crazy ideology that we lived through in the last few years, how many folks were standing against the tide? Not enough.
Right. Not until after, like,
not until one guy did
until it became popular again to stand against the tide. Like, yeah, that's it. Everybody's like,
it wasn't until conservatism and traditionalism became the official counterculture.
Right.
Did it pick up?
Yeah, and well, that's the thing, because it's easy to like swat flies one at a time. Like if somebody pipes up and it stands, adamantly opposed to whatever this, atrocity that they're talking about, it's easy to like whack that person down. But if you see this growing thing, suddenly it's like, oh, it's a force to be reckoned with.
How many folks got canceled?
Yeah.
For speaking
For
speaking truthfully.
That's it. Yeah. So everybody was quiet for the longest time.
But that person who got canceled paid the price.
Yeah.
Did the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. He or she is spiritually
strong.
Right.
Yep.
That's what you get.
Mm-hmm.
By putting the time in to understanding your beliefs and why you believe them.
Mm-hmm.
You get that strength to do the right thing, even though an ocean of sycophants are against you.
Right.
You'll weather the storm.
Mm.
Moral courage. And you don't just get that because you memorized Romans 10:13 when you were 10.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you're going to have to get in there and get your hands dirty.
Right. So that leads up to my next question, which you just partially answered, I guess, is how do you become more spiritual? I genuinely want to be more spiritually strong. Like that's a big part of my life that I feel like is lacking, and I want more of it. In your opinion, how do you become more spiritually strong?
I think, like any other aspect of your life, you have to go out and flex those muscles. It's not a call for moral activism, but if you see a wrong, you're obligated to at least acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds silly, but a few years ago we went into Walmart, and I think most of us knew this, but this Walmart right here in town, right over by the pharmacy, they were selling like sex toys openly.
Really?
Like kids could grab it. Like,
really?
Unambiguous.
Wow.
Right?
That's bold.
And moral strength is, I can't let that pass.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This isn't just bad for our society as a whole. This could potentially directly interfere with, like, am I going to say something?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I going to go home and post about it on the internet?
Yeah, secretly, quietly. Yeah.
Right, that's the difference. You got to flex those muscles. You
That's
can't
good.
just turn a blind eye to bad things happening.
Right.
That's just too easy to do.
Mm.
So, and you're not going to have the courage to flex those muscles if you don't get in there and do a workout.
Right.
Study them books. Study the history.
Yeah. Do your research. And I'm guilty of being lazy. And I've gone back and forth on this too, of faith being a choice, and I choose to believe this because I've made an active choice to believe this, but not necessarily doing my homework and understanding why I believe what I believe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that would help me a lot is to be, and I think a lot of you watching, I think it would be beneficial to actually investigate why you believe the things that you believe. Not necessarily to like prove anything wrong or right, just because you need to
you got to challenge your ideas.
Yeah.
If you're pardon my, I'm just using slang. If you're a hardcore Bible banker, great, but you need to listen to what the academics are saying about your book.
Mm-hmm.
Address their concerns, challenge your beliefs. It's not a matter of tempting yourself to go off the reservation. It's like, go out there. Is what he's saying make sense? Do you need to reformulate how you view this? Does this make sense? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
You know?
I'm willing to admit that I could be wrong about things, but that goes back. Okay, so it's like this circle that I struggle with. I'm willing to admit that I could be wrong about things, But is that a lack of faith?
No, I don't think so at all.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, listen,
Okay.
You may have learned,
Mm-hmm.
it really is as simple. You may have learned from somebody who meant well, but was wrong themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. There's no malfeasance, there's no ill will, there's
Sure.
no evil. Are you better off challenging yourself to correct yourself, or just good enough and continuing to practice, your faith and your belief
Just
system
blindly.
wrongly?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be challenged, right?
That's interesting.
Because I think once you start challenging your faith, it may get brittle.
Right.
It may.
Yeah.
But keep working, because if what you're saying is true, then your faith will be stronger on the other end of that.
True.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like even in our spiritual matters, I know enough, I'm going to coast. Can't be. Just like, we challenge the boys physically, we make them go fight and do all this stuff.
Yeah.
We push them to the breaking point where you should do that in your own, spiritual search,
Yeah.
If it is you're a man of faith and you're a Christian, you need to push that.
Yeah.
You need to know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of excellent examples throughout European history of Christians doing amazing stuff, and you don't even think about it. But yeah, these are Christians doing that.
Right.
Maybe not in the name of the faith, but they were Christians that stood against the horde.
Right.
Charles Martel's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
You're the only reason you're not a Muslim now is because that one man defied everybody, raised his own army anyway, and stood his ground and fought.
Mm-hmm.
He did it on his own. The whole world said he was crazy, didn't want to help him, thought he was dumb. He's overreacting.
Yeah.
Until the attack came, and he was there and he was ready, and
That's spiritual strength.
you're a Christian now because of Charles Martel.
Interesting.
Because they had us.
Yeah.
They had us dead to rights, but one man put his foot down and said no.
Mm-hmm.
And just like that, changed history.
Hmm.
We don't even talk about him.
Nope.
We're happy to talk about it all the time. The state got something wrong, and it's easy to blame it on the church.
Right.
Right? Okay. Is the church perfect? No, it's made up
It's made of
imperfect men.
idiots. Yeah, people. Yeah.
But that's why,
Just like me.
You need to be, you need to know what you believe and why you believe it.
Yeah.
In the Army, if your commander gives you an illegal order, you're expected to know if you're supposed to follow that or disobey it.
Mm-hmm.
In order for you to be in a position to question that judgment in a meaningful way, that means you're going to have to own up, and you're going to have to learn a little bit about the world, more than just getting by.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is this a good, moral, legal order to obey?
Or not?
Am I fulfilling this man's ambition?
Or am I blindly following?
And how many times it's not people manipulating so much, like, they manipulate religion to do bad stuff. Yeah, I think that's a human phenomenon.
People suck, yeah.
But I think it's more about people blindly following that gets you into more trouble.
Yeah.
Right? So, and the more you guys talk about this stuff and get to understand those deep roots of your beliefs, the better you'll feel about each other.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not going to ask you to violate your moral code unless there's no other choice. And we have that understanding. I would not be asking you to do this because I know this violates your moral code. And I wouldn't come to you with this request unless I thought it mattered enough to make it. Right? Not just, hey, so-and-so isn't blindly doing what I'm telling. I don't know. It's just a part of the human condition that in modernity, especially living full-time in an economy, you're just taught to ignore. You don't need to. You replace it with TV values and principles.
It's not required. It's like, the people that say I'm not religious, it's not a required part of life. It's required to be physically strong. It's required to be mentally strong, or you can't
I disagree.
do things.
I think it is required to live a good, healthy life, to be spiritually strong. And I think those folks who who don't have a spiritual foundation are operating at a deficit.
Yeah,
they're operating
I agree.
with
Yeah,
a disability.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think that's what I was saying is that's like the consensus. Like that's the idea.
Yeah,
I don't
look around.
I don't
they're
need
wrong.
this.
Look around.
Yeah,
they're wrong.
right.
The world is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
The crazies are running the crazy. You
Yeah.
know, the loony bin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, stuff's going crazy everywhere.
Yeah.
They're wrong.
Yeah.
The results are in.
The verdict is out.
Marriage is at an all-time low.
Yep.
Divorce is at an all-time high.
Right.
Crime is rampant. Racial problems are everywhere. You know, all sorts of spiritual problems left and right.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
We got Hannibal's at the gate.
Yeah.
You're wrong. Right? The results are in.
Yeah.
Cultural continuity, spiritual continuity within yourself, your family, and your community is far more important than we want to believe.
Right.
Right? And you're not going to replace that with YouTube.
No.
You're not going to replace that living an isolated life in your house. So, the final point on that, I think, would be part of your spiritual conditioning is going to be to surround yourself by other men who are going to challenge you. Challenge your beliefs.
You can't do it by yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, to some degree, I guess you can, but
I mean, if you were on an island all by yourself and all you have is
you
a
do the
Bible,
best you can.
let her rip.
You do the best you can,
Right?
but yeah, it's easier. It's much more productive with other people.
There's that space in the human experience, right? That is for the poets and the artists. We all know about it. Like, I ask folks, do you love your mother? Okay, prove it. It's like, when you think about it, it's like, well, how do you prove you love your mother? By deeds and words that you wouldn't say to your daughter, you wouldn't say to your wife. You know, there's different types of love. There's romantic love, fraternal love, you know, so on.
Yeah.
But you don't actually understand those things, and you know in your heart, for sure, I love my mother. How do you express that? How do you communicate that?
Right.
That's that intangible world.
Defining it.
Yeah, and I think that's what religion provides people. It gives them a cohesive worldview between the tangible beauty of your culture and your people, and with the pragmatism of everyday survival. You know, it ties it all together in a very lovely package. But you're gonna have to put some work into it. Don't let the TV tell you. Yeah. Because they will.
Yeah. Generally speaking, don't let the TV tell you anything. It's all lies.
It's all lies.
It's all
There's always
lies.
an agenda.
Yeah, always.
But yeah, spiritual strength is difficult.
It is. I find it to be the most difficult.
It's the hardest to talk about because modernity has programmed the masses to just revolt at the subject. So I find it's helpful. It's like, I'm not going to give you the thing that you're revolting about first. We're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll meet you halfway. And if you like what we're talking about, well, there's plenty more where that came from.
Yeah. That's the hook.
And it's less about a hook. It's more about just kind of understanding the battlefield that you have, not the battlefield that you want. You know, 100 years ago, you know, the apologetics model, the Christian mission, it worked well within a stable, homogenous culture and community. Well, you're not dealing with that.
Right.
So that same communication approach and recruiting style or broadcast style isn't going to work for this modern audience. It's going to have to be tweaked a bit.
Sure.
That's not an abandonment of the mission. It's you're still discussing what needs to be done, and I think our group is a good example of, without pushing any of them, they've most all went off and found the church that calls to them. I think one of them went to the Catholic Church, and one of them is exploring Orthodoxy.
And we got what we're talking about, guys, is the U.S. Men's Academy, and there'll be a link in the description and the comment section of this video, and that's the nonprofit organization that we've started to build up strong young men in our community. So, but yeah, I mean, I made the choice to surround myself with strong Christian men, and my life has definitely improved because of that. I made the choice to start going to church on a regular basis and learning more, not as much as I should, guilty, but I've made that decision in my life because I've seen the positive effects that come from working out. Like, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm working out.
You're working out.
Yeah, that's it. I've seen the positive effects that have spread out into all facets of my life. And what I always say is that, you've got your spiritual, mental, and physical strength. And if one of those legs of your tripod is weak, the others can fall down pretty quickly.
I'm usually pretty lenient with the boys in that it's like, okay, if church is giving you the heebie-jeebies, whatever.
Yeah.
At least read philosophy. At least get your brain focused on these core concepts of what it means to be alive and live in this world.
Yeah.
Start exercising that part of your brain.
Yeah.
Because the reason I think most folks will invariably return to the church, it's a very utilitarian outlook on it. It's like, imagine you're in the Army, but you want to dress up like sailor and act like you're in the Navy all day. You can get away with it. You probably find some degree of success. But things just go smoother, and you get a little bit further if you dress up and act like a soldier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In a world full of soldiers. You can buck the system, you can swim upstream all you want.
Yeah.
It's not surrender. It's taking advantage of the tools that have been provided to you. Right? These are useful tools. They look how far they got Europe. It wasn't until we got away from it that we start having problems.
Right.
So, a lot of good stuff there. It's worth your time. If it is, you got the heebie-jeebies and you just need to dip your toe in the water.
Sure.
All right, fine. Start off with philosophy. You'll be fine. But do it.
Do you think there's a church for everyone? Do you think that exists, or do you think?
I don't think anybody's got that answer. Everybody's the one true church.
I don't mean is there a perfect church. What I mean is there a home for everyone at church, or whether it be you're non-denominational or you're Catholic or whatever.
It's for sure possible.
Does it exist, or are there people out there that just will never fit into the mold?
It's for sure possible, but somewhere between you being a human and the church being human, it might not mesh. Because you went to one church and they're out there. We all know it, and they're just shouting nonsense from the rafters. That doesn't mean everybody's like that.
Right.
I think the older church, like Roman Catholicism and Orthodoxy, we'll call that an exclusively Protestant problem, but I don't believe that either. All the organizations have their drawbacks. That's why it's important for you to walk in there fully armed, willing to accept maybe they're not perfect. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right. What's important is that we, in general, share these values, and we are here as a community, as one.
Yeah.
Right.
The big picture. Like that's what I have an easy time with that. I think a lot of people get caught up in that, and they have a really hard time with that. Is that they get caught up in the details of, like, we don't eat shrimp, but you do. Like, or we honor the Sabbath on Saturday instead of Sunday. Like the details of that kind of stuff, I feel like are so insignificant to the big picture. And I think that the details, people get lost in the details, and they give up on the big picture.
Well, that's the difference between practice and belief. Practice is those actions you take and the words that you say that would identify you as a member of an in-group to an out-group. Right? If I'm at baseball practice, I am identifying to the outside world as a member of the baseball team.
Right.
Belief is what's between your ears. And I think folks do get caught up. Look, there's something to be said about practice. A lot of these, like, take the Jews. They've held on as long as they have because they understand the difference between practice and belief. So there is some value to tradition and the liturgy and the ceremony. But if that's standing in the way of you formulating the understanding that you're looking for, then maybe you're being petty.
Right.
Right? Is Jesus in the Eucharist, or is he represented by the Eucharist?
Right.
It's like, buddy, it's bread. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not dismissing it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I know you know what I mean? Like I have eyes.
Yeah.
And that's cool. Those are cool metaphysics. That's cool theology. But I'm not going to let that stand in the way of whether or not,
Yep.
you know, this Eucharist is going to.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I've always been a little bit like that. I'm good at I'm the big picture guy. Like I can see the big picture and I can embrace the big picture and stick with it. And the details don't throw me off. Like I don't care. Like look, you don't want to eat shrimp. I don't care. Like I'm not gonna eat shrimp.
Yeah, but I do. Now that's typically how I operate. But I do respect the orthodoxy of the Greek church and the Latin church. I love the ceremony, the pomp and circumstance, the art, all of it.
See, I'm totally different. Like, I cringe.
I see that as cultural achievement. I see that as cultural expression, cultural excellence. Look at those Gothic cathedrals. They're beautiful. They're gorgeous. Every detail.
No doubt.
Clearly, the men who built those cathedrals were divinely inspired, right? And I love that I can go into any of these Greek Orthodox church or Roman Catholic churches and I can ask them, why do you swing the incense
counterclockwise, right?
Counterclockwise. Yeah. They have an answer for all of it.
Yeah.
And they can point in the book and they can do this and show you the truth. I love that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But
funny hats and stuff.
Yeah, love it all. The vestments, I think it's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Right? I'm happy to go to those things and fully participate and give them my utmost respect and sincerity. But you know, on any given Sunday, I don't need that.
Yeah.
Right. I love that they do that.
Yeah.
It's a form of cultural expression.
I've always been turned off by, ceremony and religious ceremonies and wearing the funny hats and the standing up and turning around 3 times and like saying the things at the right time. Yeah, but that's a me thing. I think. I don't think it's. I don't know.
But see, with that comes real cultural power. Real cultural power. Like we've been doing this tradition, for instance, for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And that's what binds us generationally.
We've been singing this song for 1,000 years. Everyone's been doing that. Yeah.
There's a ceremony of the changing of the guards out at somewhere in England. I forget what it is, but they've been doing it for 700 years.
Yeah.
700 years they've been doing it. That means something.
That's impressive, yeah.
Right, and to skip it because Chuck was tired.
Friggin' Chuck. You know, I never liked Chuck.
And Steve was sick that day. No.
Steve is the worst.
So people are meaningfully sacrificing their time, energy, and their life force into keeping this tradition alive. I love that.
Yeah.
Right, and that is part of, I think, the greater Christian practice, though I myself don't personally require that to get spiritual fulfillment.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
no.
There's a lot to it. I think a lot of folks are in the moment while the world seems to be falling apart, moving towards Roman Catholicism or Greek Orthodoxy because of the tradition of it. I think they're grasping at it as more of like
stability,
cultural armor.
It's stability in a world of chaos.
It's less about the fire of the early church and more about current cultural armor and Hannibal's at the gates. But still. Those churches have been around and they've endured, good or bad. Yeah. And they're ours. They belong to our culture and our civilization, and I respect them as such.
Well, I spent the morning carrying a 250-pound cross to the top of a mountain, planting it at the top of the mountain, in remembrance of Jesus being crucified on the cross. And while I was carrying it and suffering under the weight and stuff, and we had a little bit of quiet time afterwards to think about things, think about life, and I don't know, I reflected on this stuff a lot, and I thought to myself while I was sitting there in the woods, surrounded by beautiful trees and the wind blowing and stuff, I thought to myself, why do I believe what I believe? And I didn't have a good answer for myself, I said, I believe what I believe because I choose to believe this, and based on what I've read and based on what my life experiences, that's why I believe it. But I didn't feel strong, you know what I mean, in my defining of what I believe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a search for truth, not facts, not data, not evidence, truth. That overarching understanding of what's right and true that stands the test of time, right? Because I don't care how advanced science gets, and it's quite advanced these days.
Yeah.
Science books change about every 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
But these spiritual traditions have outlived all of those fads, cultural fads.
Yeah.
And we are not better than our ancestors.
No, that's what I was just about to say.
Not even
that.
close.
We are not smarter.
We are not stronger.
We are not better. No.
We got cell phones. These guys had chops.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And to try for a moment to think that you know better than your ancestors 1,000 years ago.
It just hubris.
No, you're an idiot compared to them.
Like every caveman was an absolute giga
brilliant.
Chad. Highly intelligent, highly adaptable, highly lethal.
Because they had to solve real problems without help.
All beta males died.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, another issue that's facing the church or Christianity as a whole that does get in the way.
All beta males died. That's good.
They did.
Okay.
That's getting in the way of spiritual conditioning and spiritual strength for young men in particular is most young men feel, if you talk to them, that at least in the United States, I can't speak for the European churches, but if you talk to most young men, they don't feel like the modern church environment is conducive to healthy masculinity. And that's something we help them work through too.
I would agree with that. I would agree, and that's one of my... Make sure I'm still filming before I continue this.
Oh, hold on, because I'm falling through the chair.
Yeah, carry on.
Trying to
Oh, darn it, I missed it.
I mean, I totally...
I just turned the camera back on. Yep, so we've discussed this before. You walk into a church, you sing some songs, there's a message delivered. This is at least my church experience. Like, a message is delivered, you sing another couple songs, and then you shake hands with everybody and you part ways until next week. Now I would agree, like if that's your if that's your only experience of church and that's all church is to you, I would agree that that's not very what's the word? Maybe not fulfilling, but like I don't feel more masculine and I don't feel more spiritually strong after that necessarily. Sometimes it happens, but then there might be a really good message or something like that, or I might feel inspired. I might get something, but not always. It's the things outside of that. It's the lessons that I learn and then apply it to life. That's what church is to me. It's not just a building and a place that you go to.
See, I think that's where most modern churches are starting to struggle.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think it's malice on anyone's part. I think it's just kind of the natural, if left unchecked, the universalism that is Christianity has a habit of over-leveling the playing field. What I mean is, if a young man went to most pastors or youth pastors and was asking for man-to-man advice, what he's likely to get is good advice, but it's the same advice that could be applied to man, woman, or child. It's not men's advice.
Same life advice, just general.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's good biblical advice that works for everybody, but it isn't addressing the issue from a man's perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's again, there's no agenda behind that, though some churches clearly do. I think in general, that's just kind of what it's turned down to. And when most men are looking for guidance, experience, and tradition, I just don't. I think if you ask them, most of them will tell you that they don't feel like they're getting that from the church. They feel like they're getting that from Andrew Tate. And that sucks. Does that make sense? But at least Andrew Tate is discussing the problems men are dealing with head on.
Okay. Yeah. Now that makes sense. I mean, because he's just like, he's in your face and brutally honest about what he... I don't follow Andrew.
There's two halves to every equation. Always two halves. The problem and the solution. Early on, the problem becomes the problem because it's taboo to discuss. That's what allows the problem to manifest, to mature, to marinate, right? To become the big issue that it is. And what happens is, the first person to come out and label the problem wins the race. Now his solution may or may not be beneficial to him. It may or may not, right?
I've seen so little of it. I just think douchebag every time I see it.
Right. The problem with Andrew Tate is I don't necessarily agree with his solutions.
Right. You agree with
He's
the problem
not
he's
wrong
presenting, yeah.
With the problem that people don't like is how he says it, but he's not wrong. Because at the very least, he's saying the problem. Most of the churches aren't. It's just not PC. These are uncomfortable subjects for them. And again, I don't think they're bad people. But when men are dealing with real issues, men have real issues, okay? Andrew Tate at least says, yeah, I agree, you have real issues. And I agree that this is what the issue is. And that's attractive to somebody who feels alone and can't find leadership in a community. Right?
Yeah, and churches are oftentimes, not all of them, but churches are oftentimes afraid to talk about the real sensitive subjects for fear of losing some of their congregation, right?
Oh.
I mean, I get that. And then there's the whole, this is a whole separate subject, I guess, but then there's that balance of like, well, what do you say to keep the right number of people here because those people are benefiting from the messages that you're saying? Like there is a balance. There has to be, but what is the balance?
Well, I think the balance for like, man, men just don't go to church.
Yeah.
I just put it bluntly. It's like,
Yeah.
And
yeah, I mean, if you look at the numbers.
And this is why the Andrew Tates aren't going to go away. It's because men will tell you what the problem is. You don't like hearing that, so you don't do anything about it. You don't bring it up. You don't even acknowledge it.
Right.
That's why we have these little guy groups, is because men have real problems. They have been ignored in education. They've been left behind. They've been getting poo-pooed on for decades, right? We have a habit of a society. We've basically kicked men out of productive society, and now we blame all of our problems on the one group of people who aren't even in society, the young men.
Right.
So men will tell you exactly what their problem is, and you can either listen to them or you're going to be ignored by them. There is no in between where you ignore me and I keep showing up and putting money in the coffers.
Right.
And that's the disconnect. And men aren't being rude, but they're getting chewed up in family court. They're getting chewed up, they're losing their families. They're losing their jobs. These things are happening. They're unhealthy.
Yeah.
Right? They don't see a future, and they don't feel obligated to sacrifice, as they should, out of a sense of duty for their communities, because the communities don't care about them.
Right.
And if we're not going to talk about that and deal with that, men aren't going to go. They've had enough. It's not because they hate you.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go to, if I'm trying to buy steak, and every time I go to the butcher shop, they're out of steak.
Friggin' chicken again.
At some point, right? It's like, I got all the chicken I need. Why am I going to keep coming back to
I'm so sick of chicken.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's about all the ill will men have towards most churches in that way. It's not really ill will. It's just there's this wild disconnect between what men are actually telling them versus what a lot of them are willing to receive. They just blow them off. And until that bridge, that gap gets bridged, you're likely not going to see a lot of men pursuing spiritual fulfillment through the church. It's improving.
I think the church is a good like launching point. Like you start at the church, and that church can lead you to relationships and groups and organizations and stuff that will speak more to the masculine side of things.
They have all the tools.
Yeah.
Most of them are just caught up in the current taboo. What is okay to talk about and what is not okay to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. So another thing that's been on my mind is that, there's a lot of guys out there, like the ones that we're talking about. I'm part of the problem just as much as I am the solution, I guess. But there's a lot of guys out there that complain about what the church is and what the church should be, shouldn't be, but you're not doing anything. And if you want there to be a change, you want there to be a change in the church, you want something different from it, then go be that change. You know what I'm saying?
Now, I agree with that too.
Yeah.
It depends on the circumstance. I think some of the more older ancient churches have a much more defined route in which that change is effective. A lot of these smaller franchise churches, they're locked down.
What do you mean?
Like, you're not going to get on the board of directors. You're not going to get voted that's not happening. Those positions are occupied, and they're occupied for life. Some churches do.
Yeah.
But there's like the Methodist Church has all but gone under. And there's this, I think, unfair assertion that the Methodists didn't fight for the church. No, they fought for the church. They lost. And because they got muscled out through, they got administratively muscled out over time, right? You know, most of these churches, and I'm not trying to get into church politics, but they're 501c3s. They got to answer to folks outside of this. They got to do this. You're, like you said, it's a balancing act. There's a bit of a business to it.
Sure.
You know, it's just
complicates things.
It does, and it's not fair to pretend like they don't have to contend with that.
Right.
But that thing you're contending with is the very thing that's locking most. Doesn't give men the men don't believe that they can work within that system.
Yeah, I think there's some real value in smaller churches because you can do and you can be more free to do and say and be different, be bold, talk about real problems and stuff like that. Once churches get bigger and bigger and bigger, I feel like there's more legislation, there's more problems in there.
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
It doesn't have to be. I mean, the Orthodox Church seems to be doing okay. You know, and I put them on par with the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church has its own political entity. The Orthodox really doesn't deal with that.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not picking one over the other. Where we see a lot of this stuff is in the United States, in Western, like Protestantism isn't the same thing as what's going on in most U.S. churches. We just call it Protestantism. Technically speaking, the Protestant churches are in protest, but theoretically you could fix the problem and they would come back on paper. And it's been 500 years, probably not going to happen, but in theory they keep the sacraments, or at least most of them. Some of them have apostolic succession. They have all the ingredients. Remember, they're just broke off Catholic churches who fundamentally say, when you stop doing that stuff,
we'll come back,
right? What we see in the United States is these smaller franchise churches that have their own theology, that operate under the umbrella of Protestantism, but have nothing to do with the Protestant church. I typically call these evangelical churches. It's its own caste, it's its own branch, it's its own flavor of theology. All right, and within that mix, there's like 16,000 denominations.
Right. I can't keep track of all this stuff.
Well, so it helps to know some church history. Like, it really, some of the Protestant churches have gone under. Like the Methodists, it's like, it's all over but the crying. You know, I'd like to be proven wrong, but I don't see it.
Right.
You know, but some of these other churches have nothing to do with, they're completely new franchises, new startups, new theological underpinnings. This is how, I'm not going to get into it, but like how dispensationalism kind of, you know, sunk its teeth into Western Christianity. You know, we even know where that came from. We know who started it. We know it's wild stuff. It helps to know your church history.
Yeah.
So my concern is with too many, I call them frontier churches, the small franchise community church, is it'll fail to achieve the social gravitas it needs to influence the state. The church's job is to balance out the state. Look, if you're going to have Christianity, that's its job. You got the king, you got the bishop, right? And the king ain't doing much if the bishop doesn't tell the people to go along with it. It's a balance of power. It always kind of has been. And when the state gets out of line,
that's what it's become.
There is no Christianity without an empire behind it. Okay, Christianity would not have made it into Europe without Rome. Would not have made it in. It just I got it. That's not your belief, and that's not your theology. I'm not talking about that.
Right.
The history of the church.
The actual church.
The organism, the organization.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Who currently is the steward of that belief system.
Right.
Right? They serve the function. And in these enlightened state, post-enlightened America, it's a good example, we've completely separated church and state. Cool.
Yep.
How's that working?
Mm-hmm. Not so good.
Not so good.
Yeah.
Right? Would it have stopped what happened in, say, England? Well, it didn't stop it in England. They don't have that.
Right.
So, but it was always the balance to when the state gets out of line, you expected the pastors to put their foot down and say no. But I got to tell you, man, I haven't seen that in the last few years.
Yeah.
And don't think young men don't notice that. You know who is putting their foot down? Andrew Tate.
Mm.
He's arguing for Christianity. Like, I hate admitting this out loud. He's right. But he's out there putting his foot down, doing all this other stuff, and I'm not trying to make a hero out of the guy. He's doing the thing. And it seems like the churches, you know, maybe lack some spiritual fortitude.
Is Andrew Tate a Christian?
No, he's a Muslim.
Muslim.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm not a fan of Andrew Tate, but I'm not a fool either. You know, he's calling out the problem. He's saying the words. He's doing the thing. And I don't see pastors en masse doing that. There's a couple ones and twos out there, I think, pretty aggressive and they're pretty good. There's a couple channels out there that have really got this dialed in.
Mm.
That may be a sidebar conversation, but there's a couple Christian channels out there that are meaningfully trying to dissect the internal struggles that the church is having right now, and meaningfully work towards getting men back involved and feeling like there's a sense of enfranchisement and ownership.
Sure.
So all is not lost, but you ain't gonna sit back and just, you know, shame people into going to church.
Right.
Like they're
That's
over
not how
that.
it works.
Well, 20 years of talking smack to young men, they're probably immune to the shame laser. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, I don't think Christianity is hopeless at all. But I think if they want to meaningfully enjoy the cultural resurgence that they're kind of experiencing right now, they're going to have to open the doors back up to young men.
Right.
If they want to keep this going. Or else right now what they're seeing is reactive to Hannibal at the gate. It's less about the fire of the church and it's more about this is the last European cultural icon I can firmly hold on to.
Yeah, hang on to what's left.
So
I don't know. Well, I'm actively pursuing my spiritual strength. I'm reading more. I'm spending more time in prayer. I'm doing all the things, and I think it's working. Maybe not as fast as I'd like it to be. I'm not as strong as I want to be, but I feel that way about everything. I think I'm my worst critic by far. Like you probably do the same thing to yourself. Like I'm not fast enough. I'm not strong enough. Like I want to be more than I am right now because the people around me deserve it. And I think everyone watching probably feels feels in a similar way, at least some of the time. Spiritual strength is the hard one. I want to be better.
You know, there's plenty of gyms, plenty of intellectual material online.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like the spiritual tools, the spiritual gym, is quite as accessible perhaps as the other two. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
But it's out there if you want to look into it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Comments below, thumbs up, buttons, clicks, all the things. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Joe, for joining us. He is a very insightful individual, and I always enjoy my chats with him. Until next time, friends, what's the worst that could happen? Let's just go on 3.